Welcome back, my fellow strangers, to another episode of Traversing the Strange World. And I'm your host, Isaiah Danbury. Alright, this is another Thursday journal, Notes from the Strange World. And tonight, I want to let you into my journal again, because I've been chewing on something. It's been rattling around my brain for a while. It's one of those questions that people wield like a sword. What did the Founding Fathers believe? I feel like usually what they mean is, can I use them to validate what I already think? But let's just tonight take a look into what did they believe. And through a lens that's not really, I wouldn't say is biased to the left or the right. But as fellow strangers just trying to traverse the strange world that we woke up in and the history of it. So what I've come to learn is the Founding Fathers weren't spiritually identical. They weren't one unified Christian tribe. They were a mixture. And the tension between those beliefs is part of the American blueprint. So the first thing I came to learn is that the founding generation had a fear. And it wasn't the fear of religion. It was the fear of power that hijacks religion, because in the background of early America is Europe. Centuries of religious conflict, state churches, persecution, and forced conformity. So the founders weren't asking, should people believe in God? They were asking, what happens when the government is allowed to force belief? And the answer almost always historically was oppression. When someone says the Founding Fathers believe, that sentence is incomplete. You gotta ask which founders, because some of them were more traditionally Christian. Some of them were Christian culturally, but not theologically. Some leaned heavily toward deism, and some were deeply religious, but still wanted separation. So I want to walk through what I've come to understand, and so let's traverse my notes. If I had to put it on a spectrum, it kind of looks like this. There was the orthodox-ish Christians. These were people more aligned with traditional Christian belief and practice. Not all founders, but some influential early Americans definitely leaned here. They believed Christianity was vital for morality and for a stable society. And then there were Providence Christians. This one is important. And a lot of the founders, especially publicly, spoke in the language of Providence, Creator, Supreme Judge of the world. That's religious, but it's not always Jesus-forward theology. It's often a form of public religion, God as moral order or destiny. And then there were the deists. Deists/Enlightenment theists. This is where a lot of people might get surprised. Deism, in simple terms, is something like God created the universe, He built moral law into nature, but doesn't run the world through miracles and church institutions. Some founders strongly leaned this direction. They could admire Jesus as a moral teacher while rejecting supernatural claims. And then there were skeptics/anti-clerical voices. Not necessarily atheists, more like men who believed clergy should never be fused with state power, because they saw what it does to both. Now, I want to write a few names in this journal because names are anchors. George Washington. Washington, from what I've come to gather, was not the type to get into doctrine publicly. He used religious language, yes, providence, moral duty, but he often kept things broad and dignified. If you asked, was he a Christian? He didn't really behave like a man trying to define theology. He behaved like a man protecting unity. And then there was John Adams. Adams was openly religious in a moral sense. He believed religion was socially important. He was also distrusted fanaticism and church power. Adams is one of those examples that breaks the modern narrative. You can be religious and still reject theocracy. Jefferson is the big lightning rod. He believed in God, but he was suspicious of institutional religion. He leaned towards deism. He admired Jesus and his moral teachings, but rejected miracles. Jefferson is also one of the strongest early voices for conscience and keeping government out of religion. And also, he wrote a deist New Testament. So it's like the Gospel of Matthew, only containing Jesus' moral teachings, none of his miracles. James Madison. Madison honestly feels like the philosophical engine of religious liberty. He strongly argued that religion must be free because it belongs to conscience. Madison's belief wasn't no religion, it was the state must not coerce the soul. And then there was old Benjamin Franklin. Franklin was a spiritual pragmatic, enlightened-minded. He wasn't eager to pretend certainty. He respected religion for morality. He also emphasized virtue and usefulness over doctrine. Franklin feels like a man saying, try to be a good human and don't fake certain. Now, here's a figure I didn't really grow up hearing a lot about him. Roger Williams. He's earlier than founding fathers technically, but he's part of the DNA of America. Williams pushed the idea that faith cannot be forced. And what hit me so hard about this was he wasn't trying to build atheism. He was trying to protect the soul from coercion. He believed mixing church and government damages both. That was like planting a seed. And later, the founding fathers are building with that seed already in the soil. And a little bit about Roger Williams. Roger Williams came to New England as a Puritan, so he wasn't some secular Enlightenment guy. He was a deeply religious Christian, trained for ministry and serious about the Bible and conscience. So his desire for separation of church and state didn't come from anti-religious beliefs. It came from religious conviction. Truth faith cannot be forced. One of Williams' most famous convictions was basically, if the government forces religious belief / practice, it creates fake religion. This idea is often summarized in his statement that forced worship sinks in God's nostrils. That line tells you everything about his spiritual psychology. God wants real worship. Coercion creates hypocrisy. State religion corrupts the soul. Williams' ideas were considered dangerous in Puritan Massachusetts. He challenged the right of civil authorities to punish religious errors, taking native land without purchase. The whole model of enforced religious conformity. So in 1635, he was tried and banished from Massachusetts Bay Colony for spreading new and dangerous opinions. This wasn't theoretical debate. He paid for it. After banishment, he founded Providence in 1636 and helped establish what became Rhode Island as a place where people could practice religion freely. It became a haven for religious dissenters and minorities. This is a big deal. He's essentially an early architect of what Americans later call religious liberty. A lot of people think the wall of separation starts with Jefferson, but Roger Williams used language about the hedge or the wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world. That metaphor shows his thinking. Church and government shouldn't merge because it destroys the purity of faith. So for William, separation wasn't anti-Christian. It was pro-Christian integrity. Roger Williams even helped found what's often described as the First Baptist Church in America. He didn't stay locked into one institution. Later, he described himself as more of a seeker, basically someone looking for true Christianity without claiming any existing church had it perfectly. That's a huge part of why he resonates today. He's a devout and conscience driven. And a little bit about the Puritans that he was banished by. They were Christian Protestants, mostly in the 15 and 1600s, who wanted to purify the Church of England from what they saw as leftover Catholic practices. So even with them, we see this long trend of trying to get away from the big institutional governmental church. Even though the founders disagreed on theology, they mostly agreed on this. Faith must be voluntary. No government can control conscience. No rational church or no national church. Religious pluralism would exist. Religion and government both get corrupted when fused. And to me, that's the real heart. Not whether they all believed identical doctrines, but whether they understood the danger of sacred power. And here's where I always try to bring it back to the strange world. Because this isn't ancient trivia. This is now. Because human beings don't stop being human. We still take things and make them sacred. Maybe religion, maybe ideology, maybe a political leader, maybe a party. And when something becomes sacred, we stop questioning it. And then we call our certainty righteousness. So I've been wondering, maybe part of the American experiment was to create a system strong enough to handle disagreement, even spiritual disagreement, without turning dissent into treason. And I think there's something sacred about that in its own way. So that's what I've come to learn so far as just another fellow stranger in this strange land, trying to see what's real. And I guess I'll end this entry with a simple sentence. The founding fathers weren't united in belief. They were united in the suspicion of power because they knew when the state claims God, the soul becomes property. All right. I'm closing the journal here tonight, and wherever you are, keep your eyes open because in every generation, someone tries to blur the line again. All right, my fellow strangers, I hope you enjoyed this installment of Thursday Journal, Notes from the Strange World. The journal of a modern man living in a strange land. All right. I hope we can glean something from our founding fathers and their efforts to create a country where we can have conversation and distance from each other in our conversation about how to cohabitate. Because you know what? I really fucking love this country. I love America, and I love the American myth. The idea that we have these inalienable rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think that's something that, even if we can't prove that it's true, we should act as though it is true. All right, until next time, my fellow strangers, let's keep traversing this strange world. Let's always be reflective. Let's always be inquisitive. We're kind of just thrown into this life thing, so let's remember to be neighborly to folks, because at the end of the day, we're all just strangers in a strange land. Until next time, peace. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave a little comment too. Let us know your thoughts.
This is the outro. strangers.